A garden especially for hummingbirds, helping children cope with the Persian Gulf War, and piano jazz, today on Between the Lines. Good morning. I'm Dave Michaels. If you enjoy looking out your window at many different species of birds, sighting a hummingbird can be especially exciting. At the Georgia Department of Natural Resources Weekend for Wildlife, Karen Duva found out how to attract hummingbirds to your own backyard.
You don't have to be a bird watcher to help increase the hummingbird population. Nationwide, experts estimate that this fluttering bird's population is declining at a rate of about 1% per year.
The thing is that we in Georgia don't know exactly what's happening with our hummingbird populations. So what we're doing, we're trying to do a hummingbird helper survey to determine the status of hummingbird populations in the state of Georgia. We began this survey 2 years ago, and now we have 2 years' data, and this survey will continue for a number of years. And at the end of this survey, we'll have some good information as to whether hummingbird populations in the Peach State are going up, down, or staying the same.
The hummingbird garden features many of the nectar-rich plants and flowers favored by hummingbirds. This garden actually is a traveling exhibit that will be displayed at various sites across the state of Georgia. Visitors can learn how to create the perfect environment for these delicate birds.
I think there's a misconception, perhaps, that a hummingbird garden has to be composed only of plants that are known to attract hummingbirds, when in fact, 2 or 3 species that are known attractors may be quite satisfactory. But the salvias, for example, the hibiscus, verbena, phlox, these are kinds of the mainstay, you might say, of hummingbird gardens that we rely on heavily in the southeast. But in fact, there's quite a range of plant material that hummingbirds do feed from. The garden that is displayed at the present time, I might characterize as principally a late spring, early summer garden, but by moving selected plants into and out of the garden, it could in fact be a year-round garden. Of course, the hummingbird is not a year-round visitor to Georgia, and we are principally interested in having plants in the garden from about mid-spring to mid-fall to supply the nectar needs of the bird.
This garden is a simple and fun way to enhance your backyard, and you too can be a hummingbird helper, but be sure to keep your cats indoors.
Well, one of our hummingbird helpers this year on Christmas Eve of all times got quite a Christmas present when a black-chinned hummingbird showed up at his feeder in Roswell. And we're real tickled about that. It was the first time that the black-chinned hummingbird had ever been seen in the state of Georgia. Now, instead of 2 species, the ruby-throat, which is our common nester here, and the rare rufus, we now have the black-chinned hummingbird on the list of species that are found in the state of Georgia.
If you'd like to be a hummingbird helper, we'll tell you how. Just write to us here at Between the Lines. And remember, you can make a donation to the Non-Game Wildlife Fund by checking line 26 on the long form or line 6 on the short form of your state income tax form. Still to come on Between the Lines, a musical interview with actor Dudley Moore. Therapists at the National Childhood Institute for Grief have been advising hundreds of school systems about how to help children deal with the fears and traumas of war. These therapists have also written My Desert Storm workbook to help children come to terms with the emotional issues of the Persian Gulf War. With me in the studio is Denise McNaught, the founder and executive director of the Institute, and psychiatrist Dr. Noel Rivers Bulkley, to talk about this special book and ways we can help soften the impact of war on our children. Welcome to our program this morning. Let's ask you, first of all, what is the National Childhood of Grief Institute?
It's a nonprofit organization providing support and resources to children that have experienced parental divorce and separation, bereavement and loss, and most recently, My Desert Storm. But we're also a mental health clinic for children and their families.
How did it get started?
We started doing support groups for kids in about 1985, and we formed the first nonprofit national organization for grieving children in 1988.
Did you ever think you'd be dealing with a war?
I had no idea, even 2 months ago, if somebody would have told me that we would have had this overwhelming response. I just wouldn't have believed it.
Dr. Rivers Bulkley, why is it so necessary that we should worry about how the children perceive war? I mean, I grew up with war, Second World War, and I don't think anybody really cared, to be honest with you.
I think there was a lot of neglect of children through the World War II era, the Korean War era, and particularly through Vietnam. And for this generation of children and adolescents, this is probably the most traumatic experience that many of them have had so far as a group, with the exception of some of the things that you were talking about just now, with what we think of as more day-to-day types of traumas like divorce, family separations, death, and things like that.
In talking about the war, they see it all the time on television, obviously, and front pages of newspaper, large headlines, and so on. What is there to be concerned with how the child perceives war?
I think one of the biggest concerns that we have is that children get clear information that would be developmentally appropriate. To start with the child by saying, what is your understanding of war, and to build from there when you're talking to your child.
Doctor, don't children grow up with a fairly reasonable perception? Now, of course, it's twisted to a degree because it all comes out of their comic books and out of their cartoon series on TV, where they do talk about war a great deal. But they do have some idea of what it is.
Most of the ideas they have, though, I think, are ones that are obtained from media, from television shows and things like that. This is really the first actual campaign, particularly that's affected American children. Children in other parts of the world, Israelis, for example, in the 60s, who were more exposed to this type of experience. But for American kids, this really is the first time through.
Give us an idea of what the dangers would be, of how children would be bothered by it. I mean, how does it show up?
Well, what we've seen at our Children's Center is that there's been a lack of appetite, perhaps inability to sleep, nightmares, some night terrors, some of those kind of symptoms, inability to concentrate in school, a fear of the parent not coming home after work or the parent not being there when they come home from school. Those are the kind of responses that we're seeing. You know, war is a very abstract concept, and children think in very concrete terms. And we've said to children that war is wrong and killing is wrong, and then here we are in war and people are being killed. So it's very difficult for them to understand.
Is there a danger about how mom and dad talk about the war at home? I mean, they sit there and watch the news or they read the paper, and one has very strong opinions, the other says, no, we shouldn't be there. Or, I mean, that kind of discussion goes on in a house, but the children all hear it.
I wouldn't see that as damaging. I think it's good for children to hear different viewpoints about things like that.
Yeah.
The studies that were done during World War II of British children who were evacuees and non-evacuees focused almost entirely on the parents' opinions and the way they were responding to warfare, which has a profound influence on the children. But children, particularly nowadays, pick up their information from a variety of different sources, from their parents, also from television, with the daily briefings that we have, the news reports, around-the-clock reports, and also some special programs which have been put on aimed directly at children. So this particular generation, this particular event, the children and adolescents that I've worked with have been much better informed than probably any other group in the past at the current time that the event is actually taking place.
Your book, My Desert Storm Workbook, tell us, what was the aim? What did you try to do with this book?
We wanted to provide a tool for caring adults, school teachers, parents to use with their children to help create an environment that would be safe for the children to talk about their feelings, but to help kids identify the feelings, to be able to express them, to identify their support system, to clarify any misconceptions a child would have, and to make them feel empowered. Children so often during war feel powerless, and it feels like a loss of control for them. So that was one of the hopes for the workbook.
One of the, I'm looking for the page and I'm not finding it here, but you have some maps in here where you show where the Persian Gulf is,
right,
relation to where they are. That's
right,
important.
Right. Right.
So they know it's not in their backyard.
That's right, because many children have said, I'm concerned about the bomb being dropped on our town before I get home from school, or Daddy won't get home from work before the bomb is dropped, and they have no perception of distance and time. And so one of the things we do in our support groups is to say, do you know that Kuwait is a 24-hour plane ride from Minneapolis, to help put it into perspective for the children.
Do you get into that other children, that there are real children underneath some of those bombs?
Yes, we've encouraged the children to have a more global view, but we've talked a lot about what it must be like for the children in Israel and Iran and Iraq and some of those countries. And it's been amazing that the children really have great pity and feel very sorry for them and have been praying for the war to be over with so more children aren't hurt.
Doctor, we only have a couple of minutes to go. Is there a way to, are there any studies, I wonder, that children who have grown up with the experience of some kind of a war in their background, whether Second World, like I grew up with the Second World War, there's Korea, there's Vietnam, and now the Persian Gulf, that they are more susceptible to the fact of thinking it's easier to go to war than other children who maybe may not have had the experience?
I don't know if there's any data that would show that it has that type of perhaps lifelong influence on children, but this particular war obviously has been very much sanitized. And one concern that a lot of professionals have, which it will take time to assess, is whether or not children will have an accurate perception about what war is really like. This one has been exceptionally quick, at least on the Allied side, exceptionally small number of casualties, and almost a lack of reality about what warfare is like. And we've had very little about what it's been like for the other side, with massive casualties, massive destruction, and all of the issues that go along with being defeated by another country.
Because it's been so short compared to other wars in the past, and so efficient from the Allied coalition standpoint, maybe some more care has to be taken to explain to the child that this is really very unusual, that there were people very badly hurt in this war, although we didn't particularly want to have the war. So a lot more explanation has to go on, obviously, even though the war is over.
Yes, we need to keep talking to our children.
Denise McNaught of the National Child Grief Institute, thank you very much for being with us. And Dr. Noel Rivers-Bulkley, we appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Keep talking to the kids. That's one. Keep talking to them. All right, thank you. We'll be back with more Between the Lines right after this. The executive workout. No, it's not just for white-collar workers. It's for anyone who wants to work the entire body by using some simple isolation exercises with the help of weights. Fitness expert Linda Curry shows us how to do the executive workout in this week's Fitness Tip.
Hi. Today we have Jeff Ashcraft, who is a ski instructor in Aspen, Colorado. Welcome, Jeff. He's going to demonstrate for you the executive workout that you can do at home with just a couple of weights, some dumbbells, 10-pound weights, 3 or 4 times a week, and you'll feel great. First, you place the weights on the floor, come all the way down, and just stand up with it. This is called a deadlift. Every time you come up, pull the chest up, pull the abdomen in. He does about 10 of those and then stops, turns the weights out, and begins to work the biceps. Good. You angle the arms out. This is the muscle here, the biceps. From there, he moves right up to shoulder width, and he's going to do a military press. Palms up. Good. And he does about 10 of those. Then squeezes the elbows into the head. Bring the hands down toward the spine. That's it, Jeff. And he's working the triceps, the back of the arm. You can see we're getting every area of the body. Then bring the weights down, all the way down to the floor, and do a squat. Stand with it. Good. Good. Keep the chin up, abdomen in. Great, Jeff. Great. Now you can see that's it. You do about 10 of those, and it'll take about 15 minutes, and he's worked every area of his body. Now you can learn about this exercise by just getting some weights, think about what you want for your body, and go for it.
The students at Georgia's Carrollton High School can monitor international wire stories and the New York Stock Exchange without ever leaving their desks. Thanks to IBM and Telecommunications Incorporated, each classroom has computers linked to a system that accesses the information as it's written. Like Carrollton High, schools nationwide are using computers to broaden their students' education. In our next story, produced by CNN Special Reports, Mark Walton examines the slow growth of computers in American classrooms.
The textbook of yesterday. And in most schools of today. Experience, a textbook for tomorrow. Apple Computer's Visual Almanac, one of many new possibilities in the information age. Possibilities that are sparking revolution in some American schools.
Whoa! Oh my gosh! Hypercalculator, home, file index, datebook, address. Oh, that's all up here.
Up here on the Kitsap Peninsula in Washington State, computer technology is transforming not only learning, but every aspect of the school day.
When we started 2 years ago, we thought we wanted to put computers in the hands of kids. A month and a half later, we realized that the most important thing to do was to put computers in the hands of teachers, to find ways that we could reduce the paperwork, the lunch count, the attendance, the communications problems, all of the things that were junking up their day. I don't know that technology has made anybody's workday shorter, but it's made us more productive and more effective.
In the Central Kitsap School District, one of the most computer-intensive in the U.S., the traditional role of teacher is undergoing dramatic change.
To what?
Manager. A lot more manager of instruction as opposed to directly instructing students in a particular area.
Classroom teaching remains a staple of education, but Pat Bond's second grade spends a lot of time in this high-tech learning arcade, where computers offer math puzzles, reading challenges, problems to solve, and know every student by name.
Today we will use clues to solve problems.
These lessons are a higher thinking skill, and they're not used to thinking the way the computer's asking them to do it.
Unlike computers in many schools, these are networked or centrally linked, providing teachers instant, ongoing feedback and the flexibility to customize individual lessons by changing programs or classroom techniques.
This is kind of a check and balance system so that they get some more practice in a different mode than from me.
Since the technology came to Central Kitsap, achievement scores in math and reading have registered substantial gains.
I have math in the morning, and then like if I have computers, all I do here in computers is math. So I get 2 times as much math in a day.
With housekeeping chores electronically accomplished, teachers have twice the opportunity to interact as professional teams.
Tennessee.
Through computer learning games, teachers are building teams of students as well, preparing them for the competitive challenges of tomorrow.
Yes, yes!
The overall goal is to produce children that will be comfortable in the work environment that they will be in 15, 20 years from now. We've talked to businesses. They're telling us things like they want kids that can cooperate and work together on projects for their company.
Kentucky's? Jeez, can't go anywhere.
They're looking for people who are familiar and comfortable with technology. You know, sit down at a word processor long before they would want to write it out by hand anymore.
The district's second fully automated school is scheduled to open next fall. It has been designed to the last detail around the technology it will house. But while the information revolution has begun to transform education here, it has barely reached the doorstep of many American schools.
We have over 50 million people involved in elementary and secondary education. And what we've done is we have saddled them with the equivalent of Model T technology.
Over the past decade, information technology has practically reinvented American business, science, medicine, the military, entertainment, but for the most part, not education. Computers are now present in more than 95% of American schools. But according to congressional studies, the national average is 1 computer for every 30 public school children. Nowhere near enough for computers to play a central role in education. The technology that does exist is by and large outdated. Half of all teachers have never used a computer. Most have never been trained to.
Well, it's a matter of funds. I mean, everybody's been saying there's no problem with money in schools, but that's what you miss, is the capital investment in improving productivity.
With less than 1% of the nation's kindergarten through high school dollars now being spent on computer technology, there is little incentive in the industry for research or innovation.
We do not have the great software developers, the great hackers of our time, the great minds of our time working on instructional software. They're working in other parts of the economy.
We store a lot of sound here.
In San Francisco, Christina Hooper is an outstanding exception.
Here we wanted to include sensibility of a lot of drama, a lot of excitement about science, as well as some, good science.
3 years ago, this software genius was recruited by Apple, the computer hardware manufacturer.
Hey, you could teach this way if you had these kinds of systems. Hey, look how it would work.
Her prototype systems link a personal computer to a variety of video and sound sources.
All right, well, teach us about biology.
So you want to know about biology?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this thing called DNA, which is the basis of life, and we all learned about it in school. But what we want to think about is how could you have learned about it in a way that it really stayed with you?
Perhaps the first meeting of the pioneering scientists portrayed in a movie will draw you in.
Where would you look for a gene if you were looking?
Excuse me. My hunch is the nucleic acid.
You get the sense that these are real characters, it's real people that do science, not just people in lab coats. Let's look at it in a little bit more detail. And we sort of see a text description that tells you more about these two people. If you want to hear more, you can click here and get a biography of Jim Watson, for example.
Maybe a gadget in the laboratory raises a question.
This is an X-ray diffraction camera. Just click on it again to find out how it works.
One of the teachers that we work with used this in a class, and her problem was that everybody did well.
But we're a whole long way from having those in 80,000 public schools and used by 40 million public school students. That's just a long way off.
In terms of investment in technology, we have barely begun to scratch the surface.
To scratch the surface of what's possible in the education revolution.
Coming up next on Between the Lines, a show that combines jazz piano and talk radio. Early treatment of burns can reduce pain and lessen the severity of the wound. In today's Tip of the Week, Chief Mac Billings explains first aid methods for burns.
Most fires occur during the colder months when people are in their homes trying to stay warm. Many of these fires could be avoided if people would adhere to many safety rules. When using your fireplace, never start a fire with flammable liquid. You should clean and check the chimney before using the fireplace, and all loose and damaged bricks should be repaired. When cleaning the fireplace, make sure the ashes are cold or stored in a safe container. Also, make sure your fireplace screen is large. When using your wood-burning stove, never start a fire with flammable liquid. And before using your stove, be sure all pipes and fittings are installed according to the safety requirements. There are several types of home heaters used. All liquid fuel burning heaters should be refilled outside, and the liquid should be stored outside as well. These types of heaters should always have good ventilation within the room where the heaters is being used. The cords and connections on electric heaters should be checked regularly and replaced if needed. The cords should never run under rugs, and as always, children should never be left unattended near any heating appliance or source.
A quick flip through the radio dial is all you need to know that there's a station out there for just about any musical taste, heavy metal to easy listening. But say you want to hear some jazz piano. Well, relax. Dennis Michael has found a radio program just for you.
Most interviewers go to work armed with little more than a notepad. Maria McPartland, hostess of National Public Radio's Piano Jazz, uses a pair of grand pianos to facilitate conversation. For 11 years, McPartland, herself a respected jazz musician, has specialized in the piano on the radio, the very different people who play the piano, and the things they have in common.
I would say the common thread is being able to improvise and take maybe new tunes or well-worn tunes or their own tunes. And even though it might be somebody I've not met, we can establish a rapport, play together, and make the things sound pretty reasonable for the most part. Do you sit down and say, I'm now going to write a tune, or does something come to you in your head and you just noodle along with the tape recorder or something?
Today's guest at a recording studio in Los Angeles is jazz pianist and composer Dudley Moore, who you may have also heard has done a little acting work here and there.
I like talking to a musician about things that are musical. You know, it's nice to do that. It's nice to find somebody who knows what you're talking about. I don't mean that in a condescending way, but I mean who knows technically what you have in mind, that sort of thing.
Not that talking is what goes on most of the time. Dudley Moore, who's been a guest on Piano Jazz a number of times, says McPartland interviews very much in the same way she plays.
You always get the feeling that she in some way is allowing her feelings to take charge, to take her wherever she wants.
I don't have a set script or everything written down that I'm going to say, or if I do have something written down, it might change because of what the guest will say.
Piano Jazz is now in its 11th year on NPR. If talk shows on the radio have begun to sound all the same to you, this one might be music to your ears.
If you'd like more information on anything you've seen on Between the Lines, write to us at 1050 Techwood Drive Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia, 30318. We close our show with a look at the Arbor Day celebration, which took place on February 15th at Mountain Park Elementary School in Roswell, Georgia. Thanks for sharing your morning with us. I'm Dave Michaels. Join us next week for more Between the Lines.
Whereas, in 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees. And whereas this holiday called Arbor Day was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska.
Got it. All your names and your little where you should practice put in. Good idea.
Appreciation of what national parks are. A little bit about maybe the southeast region and the parks in the southeast region.